seen multiple Supreme Court rulings lately that have made history: gay marriage, healthcare, environmental regulations, and a new ruling on lethal injections. This all affects Missouri. Good evening, I'm Brittany Pieper.
And I'm Katie Link. Let's start with the ruling of the Michigan versus EPA case, where the Supreme Court slapped down the Obama administration's attempt at limiting power plant emissions. KOMU 8's Abby Rice has more on how the ruling would have affected your energy bills.
With the 5-4 ruling, the U.S. Supreme Court voted down the so-called mercury in air toxins rule, saying the EPA did not take into account the costs. If it had gone the other way, the EPA said it would have cost the industry an estimated $9.6 billion a year. The EPA says the regulation would have limited emissions, creating safer and cleaner air. Missouri and 22 other states argued that the regulations were too costly for businesses and consumers. Earlier today, I spoke with a Boone Electric Cooperative spokesperson about the ruling, and he told me that cost would have ended up in customers' electric bills.
Everyone thinks that we can just, these costs are just paid for by these big power companies. They're not. Anytime that there is a cost, that will end up coming down to the consumer.
Rolfing said Associated Electric Cooperative is making efforts to reduce emissions. We reached out to the Department of Natural Resources and some environmental advocacy groups for comment, but did not hear back.
Another U.S. Supreme Court ruling today looked at lethal injections. The court ruled 5-4 to allow the use of the drug midazolam in lethal injection executions. The drug had raised concerns because of evidence that it does not put inmates into a coma-like sleep. St. Louis Public Radio reported the Missouri Department of Corrections had used this drug for about a year in 2014. Despite continued use of the drug, some people and organizations here in mid-Missouri say the idea that you can humanely take a life defies logic.
No matter how you present it, you're still talking about a cruel and unusual punishment from our perspective.
We reached out to both the Missouri Department of Corrections and the Attorney General's office to get their opinion on the ruling. Both declined to speak on camera about the matter.
The Supreme Court made another ruling on Friday that allows same-sex couples to marry nationwide. Today, KOMU 8 News contacted 14 counties in mid-Missouri to find out if Recorder of Deeds offices are issuing licenses and if people have been seeking them. Boone County is the only county out of the 14 we contacted that has actually issued same-sex marriage licenses. The office issued 1 today and 6 on Friday. Every county we contacted has been capable of issuing a same-sex license since Friday, except Audrain and Marys. Marys County says it will start issuing same-sex licenses on July 20th. Some counties need to update their computer software and will write licenses by hand if a couple wants one before the update. But the Audrain County Recorder of Deeds office says it will want to wait until computers are updated to avoid any potential mistakes. The recorder says she expects the office will start issuing licenses next week. She also expressed how she felt about the change.
It hasn't really affected me. I mean, it doesn't matter what I believe in or what I don't believe in. I mean, I took the oath of office and I will do what the office tells me to do. So it really doesn't bother me one way or another.
Every Recorder of Deeds office in Missouri has 25 days to implement this change. To check out which counties we contacted and what they said, head over to KOMU.com.
This evening, people in 2 cars shot at each other and then drove away. It happened in Columbia at the corner of Hickam Drive and Clark Lane. Neighbors say they're concerned because the street's usually quiet and kids play on it. The suspect shot a bullet through an SUV's back window owned by a neighbor. Police say they do not have a suspect description, but they did describe the cars involved as a white 4-door vehicle and a darker colored vehicle. We spoke to one officer about what he found at the scene.
4 to 5 shell cases were found on scene, and officers interviewed witnesses and other individuals at the scene to determine that 2 separate vehicles were firing at each other.
No injuries have been reported. If you have any information about the incident, you can call Crime Stoppers at 573-875-TIPS.
The Community Church of Christ announced today it would close many of its ministries around the world, including one right here in Columbia. KOMU 8's Alyssa Caceres is live at the center and has more on why it's closing.
Earlier today, I got to talk to the founders of Columbia's Imani Mission Center, and they told me they have no idea why the center is closing. But when I reached out to the church that funds the center, a spokeswoman told me a different story. She said the church needs to reduce its budget, and the Columbia Mission Center has no funds to complete necessary repairs to make the building safe. Founders of Columbia's Imani Mission Center said they were notified of the request on June 8th, but are still confused about why. Today, they packed up moving boxes and reflected on how the Mission Center has helped the community.
I mean, from paying bills to after-school programs to identity to the worth of all persons to going to the courtroom, being advocates for the people who, you know, that needed moral support, you know, and kind of the main thing we did was want to fight peace and justice issues.
The Imani Mission Center told me it plans to close its doors July 1st. Reporting live in Columbia, Alyssa Casares, KOMU 8 News.
A Missouri state senator wants to create a suicide prevention and training program for teachers. Senator Shoup says she created the bill because the daughter of a man in her district committed suicide. She says she wanted to create a program to help future families from losing their children to suicide. The bill would require each school district in the state to adopt a suicide prevention policy. The course is not required, but if a teacher or educator chose to take the course, it would help them spot at-risk kids and help them before it was too late. Shoup says the bill had a lot of support, but there was a technical problem that prevented the bill from becoming law.
It had bipartisan support, and even though it was in its infancy as a piece of legislation, but for an error made by somebody adding an amendment, I think that bill would be law right now.
Shoup says because the bill received such positive feedback, she will refile next year.
Troop F of the Missouri State Highway Patrol has already assisted 214 drivers this month. That's numbers pretty high. In November of 2014, to compare it to, Highway Patrol says it's always one of the busiest months, and Troop F assisted just 162 drivers then. Highway Patrol says summer heat could factor into cars breaking down, but more drivers on the road for the summertime is probably the more likely cause. The one tow truck business owner says his calls usually pick up in July, and his business is ready for a busy holiday weekend.
We'll have a third guy on. Usually we have a primary, secondary guy. There is more accidents, you know, so if that's the case, then we would have 3 drivers that we could send out if need be.
He said most towing companies have time frame contracts requiring them to arrive in 30 to 45 minutes, but on busy days, tow trucks don't always get there on time. So if the wait's longer than 30 minutes, he said you might want to consider calling a different company.
A Springfield woman pleaded not guilty to murdering her mother today. Gypsy Blanchard did not speak during her arraignment. Authorities believe she plotted with her boyfriend to kill her mother, Claudinia, earlier this month.